Never told her I owned the bakery. Not when we met at the church potluck in September. Not when she complimented my sweet potato pie and asked if I baked professionally. Not when we started having coffee every Sunday after service and she'd lean across the table and laugh at my old stories like they were the funniest thing she'd ever heard. I just let her think I was a retired postal worker who puttered around the kitchen because I had nothing better to do with my time. And honestly, that was the smartest thing I ever did. My name doesn't matter much for this story. What matters is that I'm 64 years old, I live in Columbus, Ohio, and I've been a widower for 6 years. My wife Pauline, God rest her, built something with me. 22 years of early mornings and flour-dusted aprons. We started the bakery out of our garage on Morse Road in 1998, just the two of us and a second-hand commercial oven she found at an estate sale. By the time she passed, we had a proper storefront, a steady catering contract with 2 local churches and a school district, and a small rental property on the east side that brought in reliable income every month. When Pauline died, I kept the bakery going because I didn't know what else to do with myself. My daughter Kezia, she's 31, sharp as a tack, works in HR downtown. She worried about me. She'd stop by the shop on her lunch break and sit at the counter eating a cinnamon roll just to make sure I was still talking to people. My son-in-law thought I should sell. He said I was working too hard for a man my age. But the bakery was Pauline's dream first and mine second, and walking away from it felt like losing her a second time. So I stayed. For 3 years I stayed and I was fine. Quiet, but fine. Then I met her. Her name was Diane, and she was standing near the dessert table at our church's annual fall potluck, with a paper plate and a look on her face like she was judging every dish. She was 58, recently relocated from Atlanta, said she'd moved north to be closer to her adult son. She had a warm smile and she laughed easily, and when she tried my sweet potato pie, she closed her eyes for a second, like she was somewhere else entirely. "You make this yourself?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "You bake a lot?" "Here and there," I said. And that was that. I didn't say I own a bakery on Morse Road and a rental property and am more comfortable financially than I look. I just smiled and let her think what she wanted to think. It wasn't a calculated move at the time. I was just a private man who'd been burned before by people who looked at me and immediately started doing math. After Pauline died, a woman from my old neighborhood had introduced herself to me at the funeral repast, the repast, mind you, and within 2 weeks was asking whether I owned or rented. I learned to be careful with what I shared and how quickly I shared it. So with Diane, I was just a retired postal worker who liked to bake. We started seeing each other in October. Coffee after church became lunch on Wednesdays, and lunch on Wednesdays became long phone calls on Friday nights. She was easy to talk to. She'd been divorced for 11 years, said her ex-husband had been controlling with money and dismissive of her opinions. I sympathized. She liked gardening and old jazz, and she had a way of asking questions that made you feel like your answers actually mattered. I liked her. I genuinely liked her. Kezia had her reservations from the start. "How much do you know about her, Dad?" she asked one evening in November. We were at my kitchen table and she'd stopped by after work, still in her coat. "Enough," I said. "Does she know about the bakery?" "Not yet." Kezia looked at me over her mug. She didn't say anything else that night, but she didn't have to. I'd raised her. I knew what that look meant. By December, Diane and I were spending most weekends together. She cooked for me once. Chicken and rice, nothing fancy. But she set the table nicely and lit a candle, and it felt like something I hadn't felt in a long time. I missed being cared for. I think that's the honest truth of it. 6 years is a long time to come home to a quiet house, and I had started to mistake warmth for wisdom. Her son visited for the holidays. His name was Terence, and he was 33, unemployed at the time, and he had a way of looking around whatever room he was in, like he was taking inventory. He shook my hand too firmly and called me by my first name with a slight edge in his voice, like he was testing something. I noticed it. I filed it away. "Mom talks about you a lot," he said, leaning back in Diane's dining room chair. "Says you're a good man." "I try to be," I said. "She says you used to work for the post office." 23 years, I said. He nodded slowly, the way people do when they're not really listening. I drove home that night with a low feeling I couldn't quite name. Diane and I got engaged in February. I know how that sounds. 4 months is fast, and I knew it was fast. But I was 64 years old and I was tired of being lonely, and she seemed right in all the ways that mattered. Kezia cried when I told her. Not happy tears. Dad, please slow down, she said. I know what I'm doing, I said. Do you? We argued that night, the first real argument we'd had in years. She said I was moving too fast, that I didn't know Diane's full situation, that I was making a decision based on emotion. I told her she was being overprotective. She told me she hoped she was wrong. She was not wrong. 3 weeks before the wedding, I did something I should have done in October. I sat down with my attorney, a woman I'd worked with for years when Pauline and I set up the bakery's LLC, and I asked her to walk me through my options. We talked about prenuptial agreements, about how my assets were currently structured, about what would happen to the bakery and the rental property if my marital status changed. By the end of that meeting, 2 things were clear. The first was that I needed a prenuptial agreement, and I needed it signed before we walked down any aisle. The second was that I should have that conversation with Diane before she found out about the bakery from anyone else. I told her on a Wednesday evening at my kitchen table. I made coffee and I sat across from her and I said, "There's something I should have told you sooner, and I'm sorry I didn't." I watched her face as I explained. The bakery, the rental property, the LLC, the fact that I hadn't been entirely honest about my financial situation because I'd wanted to be known as a person first, not an asset. She was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. I figured there was something, she said. You always seem too comfortable for a tired mailman. We laughed. It felt okay. She said she understood, that she appreciated my honesty, that she had no interest in my money and just wanted to build a life together. She signed the prenuptial agreement 2 weeks later without a single objection. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt a small, quiet unease that I couldn't explain. We got married on a Saturday in April. Small ceremony at the church, maybe 40 people, a reception in the fellowship hall. Kezia gave a toast that was kind and measured and told me later, quietly, that she loved me and would support whatever I chose. My old friend Howard danced with his wife and bought me a drink at the reception bar and told me Pauline would have wanted me to be happy. I held on to that. 2 weeks after the wedding, Terence moved in. I want to be precise about this because the timeline matters. We had not discussed Terence moving in. At no point during our 4 months of dating, our engagement, or our wedding planning had Diane mentioned that her son needed a place to live. I knew he'd been couch surfing between friends after losing his apartment, but I had understood that to be a temporary situation he was handling on his own. I came home from the bakery on a Tuesday afternoon and there were boxes in my living room. What's going on? I asked. Diane came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on a dish towel. Terence needed somewhere to land for a little while, she said, just until he gets back on his feet. We didn't talk about this. I know. I'm sorry, I should have called you. It happened kind of fast. I looked at the boxes. I looked at her. I said, "How long is a little while?" She said she didn't know. Maybe a few months. Terence came downstairs then, nodded at me once and went to the kitchen to make a sandwich. He didn't ask. He didn't ask her this was my house. He moved through the space like he already owned it. That night I slept badly. Over the next 2 weeks, small things accumulated. Terence started using my truck without asking because he said the insurance was better. Diane began asking me to deposit my bakery income into our new joint account, the one we'd opened for household expenses, rather than keeping it in the business account the way I always had. When I explained that the bakery finances needed to stay separate for tax and liability reasons, she said she understood but brought it up again 3 days later. It would just be simpler, she said, for household budgeting. The business account is the business account, I said. That's how it's always been. She smiled in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. Terence, meanwhile, had started spending time at the bakery. Just stopping by, he said, having coffee, talking to my staff. Once I arrived to find him behind the counter, chatting with my morning baker, like they were old friends. I asked him later, politely, not to come by without letting me know first. "You're being territorial," he said. Just like that. Standing in my kitchen, eating cereal that I bought, telling me I was being territorial about my own business. I didn't respond. I walked out of the kitchen and sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes, breathing. Kezia called that evening like she had a sixth sense. "How's it going, Dad?" "Fine," I said, which was the wrong word for what I meant. "Dad." "It's an adjustment," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "You know I'm right here if you need me." "I know, baby." The following week, Diane sat me down at the kitchen table after dinner. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her, which I noticed immediately because Pauline used to use yellow legal pads for her business planning, and the sight of one still caught me off guard. "I want to talk about the future," she said. I waited. "Terence has some ideas," she said, "about the bakery." I felt something go still inside me. She explained, carefully and with a kind of practiced reasonableness, that Terence had experience in food service management. He'd worked at a restaurant in Atlanta for 2 years before it closed, and that he was interested in getting more involved with the bakery. As a partner, he'd been doing research, she said, visiting the shop, getting a feel for the operation. "A partner," I said. "A junior partner. He would invest some of his own money." "He doesn't have money." "He would bring energy and management skills." "He's been unemployed for 8 months." "He's been going through a transition." Her voice had a firmness now underneath the reasonableness. "And he is my son, and this is supposed to be our life together. I would think you'd want to find a way to bring him in." I looked at the yellow legal pad. I looked at her face, and I thought of something my attorney had said during our first meeting, almost offhandedly. Sometimes people don't reveal what they want until they feel secure. "I need some time to think about this," I said. She nodded. "Of course, take your time." I called my attorney the next morning. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. I told her everything. Terence moving in, the pressure about the joint account, the request for a business partnership. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said something I wrote down on a notepad and have kept ever since. She said, "What they're describing taken together is a gradual transfer of control. The joint account request would make bakery income marital property. A partnership agreement, depending on how it's structured, could give Terence a legal claim to business assets. You have protections in place, but you need to decide how you want to use them." She asked me one question. "Do you want to try to save this marriage, or do you want to understand what you're dealing with first?" I said I needed to understand what I was dealing with. She referred me to a private investigator. I want to be honest about that because some people will judge it. I had someone to look into Diane's background more carefully than I had before the wedding. It felt uncomfortable. It also felt necessary. What he found was not criminal, but it was clarifying. Diane had been through a previous relationship, not her first marriage, a relationship after that had ended with a civil dispute over shared property. The other party had alleged financial manipulation. The case had been settled quietly. Terence had a record. 2 counts of check fraud, both misdemeanors from his time in Atlanta. Neither of these things had come up in our conversations. I sat with that information for 3 days. On a Thursday evening, I asked Diane to sit down with me. Terence had gone out and the house was quiet. I had a folder on the table in front of me. Nothing dramatic, just some papers. And I folded my hands on top of it the way my father used to when he was about to say something that mattered. I told her I knew about the civil dispute. I told her I knew about Terence's record. I told her I was not interested in a business partnership, that Terence needed to find his own housing by the end of the month, and that if she wanted to continue this marriage, we needed to go to couples counseling and rebuild from a foundation of honesty. She stared at me for a long moment. "You investigated me," she said. "I protected myself," I said. "I can't believe you would." "Diane." I said her name quietly, not unkindly. "I built that bakery with my wife. I kept it going when I didn't know how to keep going myself. I have a daughter who depends on me and a staff of 4 people who depend on that business. I am not going to apologize for protecting what I built." She left the table and went upstairs. Terence moved out 9 days later. He left without speaking to me directly, which was fine. The boxes in the living room were gone by a Friday afternoon, and when I came home that evening, the house felt like mine again, in a way it hadn't since April. Diane and I tried. I want to be fair about that. We went to 3 sessions of couples counseling, a kind woman named Dr. Okafor who had an office in Westerville and a very calm way of drawing things out into the open. In the second session, Diane admitted she had known about the bakery before I told her. A woman from our church, a mutual acquaintance, had mentioned it. She had decided not to say anything because she wanted to see if I'd tell her myself. I asked her how long she'd intended to wait. She didn't answer. In the third session, she said she felt like I would never fully trust her. She wasn't wrong. There was a version of me that wanted to try harder, to believe that what happened was recoverable. But there was another version, the version that had watched my wife build something from nothing, that understood what it took, that knew what it meant to earn a thing, and that version knew the truth. I filed for divorce in August. My attorney handled it. Because of the prenuptial agreement, the process was straightforward. The bakery remained mine. The rental property remained mine. We divided the household contents without drama and went our separate ways. I paid her a modest settlement because it felt like the right thing to do and because my attorney advised it would simplify things, which it did. I told Kezia on a Sunday after church. We were sitting in the bakery after closing, just the two of us, and I'd made coffee and pulled out some leftover apple fritters and set them on the counter the way I used to do when she was little, and something needed to be talked about. She didn't say I told you so. She never has, and I'm grateful for that every time I think about it. She just put her hand over mine on the counter and said, "I'm glad you're okay, Dad." "I'm okay," I said, and that time I meant it. That was 14 months ago. I'm still here. The bakery is still open, Tuesdays through Saturdays, and my morning baker makes better biscuits than I do now, though I'll never tell her that out loud. The rental property is still rented. I still go to church on Sundays and I still bring a dish to the potluck every fall. I don't regret marrying Diane. I know that sounds strange, but I don't. I regret moving faster than my instincts were comfortable with. I regret dismissing my daughter's concerns because I wanted her to be wrong. I regret not having the conversation with my attorney before the engagement instead of after it. Those are my regrets. But here is what I took from all of it, and I say this to anyone who is listening. Anyone who is older and lonely and starting to wonder if warmth is the same thing as trustworthiness. Get the agreement in writing. Know your assets and protect them before you need to. Listen to the people who knew you before you were in love with someone new. Background is not an invasion of privacy. It is information, and information is not unkind. And if someone shows you who they are, if their child treats your home like a waiting room and your business like an opportunity, believe them. Don't wait for a second chapter to confirm what the first one already told you. Pauline used to say that the hardest part of running a small business wasn't the money or the hours. It was learning to trust the right people with something you'd built with your hands. I think about that a lot. I'm still learning who the right people are, but I'm still here, and the bakery is still mine. And on a clear morning when I open up and the coffee is going and the first tray comes out of the oven and the whole block smells like something good. On those mornings, I feel exactly like myself. That's enough. That has always been enough. I still think about that yellow legal pad. Diane had set it on the table like it was something ordinary, just a notepad, just a conversation. But I've been around long enough to know that the most consequential moments in a person's life rarely announce themselves loudly. They arrive quietly, over coffee, dressed up as reasonable. What happened to me wasn't complicated when I look back at it honestly. I let loneliness move faster than judgment. I wanted warmth badly enough that I stopped asking the harder questions. Not because I was foolish, but because I was human. 6 years is a long time to come home to silence. And when someone fills that silence, it's easy to call it love before you had the chance to call it anything else. But here's what I've come to understand about the way things unfold. Actions have weight. Every choice carries a consequence that's proportional to the character behind it. When Terence walked through my house like he owned it, when Diane brought up the joint account once and then again 3 days later, when she sat across from me with that legal pad. Those weren't isolated moments. They were a pattern. And patterns don't lie. I didn't need to be angry about it. I just needed to see it clearly. Seeing clearly. That's the thing I almost lost. I'd spent 22 years building something real with Pauline, and part of what made that work was that we were both honest about what we were doing and why. We kept records. We asked questions. We made decisions with our eyes open. That discipline. The habit of thinking before trusting. Of verifying before committing. That's what ultimately protected me, even when my heart wasn't fully cooperating. And then there's the matter of what it took to act on what I knew. It would have been easier to ignore the legal pad, to tell myself I was overreacting, to avoid the discomfort of calling an attorney, hiring an investigator, sitting across from Diane and saying the words out loud. Easier and much more costly. I've learned that the courage to do an uncomfortable thing, not reckless courage, but the steady, quiet kind, is what separates the people who hold on to what they've built from the people who lose it while hoping things will improve on their own. Kezia never said "I told you so." That mattered more to me than I knew how to say at the time. She just put her hand on mine and said she was glad I was okay. That's what real people in your corner look like. They don't celebrate being right. They just stay. I think about Pauline and what she would have made of all this. I think she would have said, "You built it once. You can recognize when someone's trying to take it apart." She believed that integrity wasn't just about being honest with others. It was about being honest with yourself, even when honesty was inconvenient. The bakery is still open, Tuesdays through Saturdays. That's the whole story, and it's enough.